you, John. I want to start our session, however, in thanking John Runyon and Tiffany Monsalis for handling your questions. Questions were also coming to me, and so even during the devastation, the time period where lives were uncertain as to how we were proceeding or what our new normal was at that time, both John and Tiffany agreed quickly to lead this session for a Q&A as the projects are being entered into Project Tracker. I see another individual who is joining with telephone. I'd like to verify who this is. Number 630-8231. And you're on mute, okay.
Hi, Cheryl, this is Garth. How are you doing?
Oh, wonderful, thank you. I'm just going to indicate that it's your phone. We're all doing well. It's good to hear updates about the facilities above Estacada River Mill Dam from PGE.
Yeah, we're hanging in there. It's been a challenging time, that's for sure. But all our infrastructure appears to have made it, and we've been passing fish throughout the fire. We're back into normal operation mode where we're now enumerating and sorting adults. So pretty amazing coho return thus far. We probably missed about a quarter of the return, but it's looking like we could potentially have an all-time record coho return, upwards of 9,000 fish this year. So it's been pretty awesome.
And we were hearing from PGE for all of you to know that a pit tagged fish was found in Tryon. So our tributary confluences at the Willamette are extremely important for our Clackamas populations, as you all know. Another sign of the importance for all the tributaries and our joint efforts for Clackamas populations with our partnership.
That was really neat. Reached out to Brooke and sent her that pit tag code, and I believe that coho was tagged February 7th, 2019. So that would be an overwintering par, so not a smolt. I believe it was 88 millimeters when it was tagged, and then of course returned back to the project as an adult. So pretty neat. That's now the third fish from a very, very small sampling effort in Tryon Creek. So, you know, while we only have 3 detections of adults, 2 Chinook and 1 coho, the fact that they tag so few fish and that we've got them back as adults indicates that the survival must have been pretty dang good for those fish that utilize that life history strategy of dropping down and overwintering in those lower Willamette tribs. So kind of a neat little feather to have in your cap, especially for you guys completing restoration work in the lower Clackamas.
Tangent. Who manages that array? Is that managed by the Tryon Creek Council or ODFW?
Well, the actual array was located at River Mill Dam, so they're just doing pit tagging on Tryon Creek. They're staining and electrofishing juveniles, tagging them, then they release them, and then when they return as adults, they're either detected at the Willamette Falls Fishway, where they have an array, which is managed by ODFW, or here on the Clackamas with the PG infrastructure at River Mill Dam, which we manage.
Gotcha. So it was found via electrofishing. Did I get that right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's. I believe it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that's doing the electrofishing and tagging at that location.
Yes, that's correct.
Alrighty, so we'll get started with the Q&A session. To get started, reminders, if you'll mute while you're not speaking, that will be helpful for everyone to hear. While we are not a very large group, still would be helpful to know who has a question. You can raise your hand or enter your question in the chat. So 2 ways to indicate that you have a question. And raising your hand would is a feature down on the lower banner bar. John, Tiffany, would you like to begin then?
Okay, I'll begin. So I want to introduce Tiffany today. For those that don't know her, she's with the Johnson Creek Watershed Council, and she is taking on the role of being the point person essentially for Project Tracker. She's available to help you all as you enter data. If questions come up along the way and you're using the help feature in Project Tracker, it's important for you to understand that those help messages go out to myself, to Tiffany, to Cheryl, and others who are classified in the system as administrators. We have godlike powers where we can do anything we want within the system, essentially. We'll do the best we can to address your questions. In some cases, we need to go to Sitka to figure out the question. But that's the way it works. When you go into help and you essentially put in a question, you've got a problem, that goes out to all of us. Sitka's copied on it, but Sitka only helps if we request additional help from them. So basically, Tiffany will be the point for that. I'll work with her to address your questions and issues along the way. So that's the help feature in there. So with that, let me share my screen and provide just kind of a quick overview. Let's see.
Also, real quick, I'll just say hi while John's doing that. Yeah, my name is Tiffany Mencius. I work with the Johnson Creek Watershed Council as the Community Outreach Coordinator, and also in this role assisting with Project Tracker. So always happy to help. I've got a lot of familiarity with technology and, enjoy being able to walk people through things. So feel free to reach out to me via email if anything comes up even after this session as well. So thank you guys.
Sorry about that, just having a little, there we go, there it is, okay. Can everybody see this? Clackamas Partnership website, great. So just so you understand, Sitka upgrades the features in Project Tracker periodically. And if you look up here under help, there are, and I'll go through this in more detail, there are release notes where they talk about new features that have been released for Project Tracker. And I think many of you are aware, we're part of a larger ecosystem of about a dozen other entities that have adopted the Project Firma platform. Project Firma is kind of the background platform that is adapted to, for example, the Puget Sound Partnership, the Resource Conservation Districts down in California, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts in Idaho, and a number of other entities have adopted this platform, and they've basically used the architecture of this platform the same, but then they adapt it specifically for their program. So there are features that are developed for the various platforms, and in most cases we can adopt a feature that's been paid for example, by the Puget Sound Partnership. Conversely, we just recently paid for an upgrade in the system that allows us to attach documents. Whoops. It allows us to attach documents like meeting minutes, that sort of thing up front in the system, and I'll show you where that is in a bit. And that was a feature that was added to our system and then shared with the larger ecosystem of other Project Firma platform folks. And so if you open up release notes, you can see the various features that have been released into the platform. Some of them we have to adopt because they would be modified for our platform and might cost a little budget to do that. Other ones are sort of automatically put in. An example of that is they've updated the map feature here where they've basically provided, I think, a really nice additional function here where you get sort of the grouped projects, because before, if you looked at this map, it was just a scatter shot of past projects that we implemented, proposed projects, et cetera, across the landscape. And here they've grouped them just to provide a better visual of things, and you can then zero in on any of these groups and you can see what the actual projects are. It'll take you right into that page. And then you can click on that individual project, and there's a little thumbnail description of it, and you can go into the project fact sheet, et cetera, from there. I think many of you are aware of that. But this is just an example of a feature that's been added to Project Tracker that most entities have adopted, for example. So look at the release notes. If there's things in there that you think that we should perhaps pull into our system that we have not, we can consider that. One of the items that they have added is a prioritization framework where you can go through and prioritize projects based on criteria. We thought about using it, but it's just not quite robust enough for our prioritization process right now. But we'll be working with Sitka ultimately to, I think, get prioritization online and that sort of thing. So anyway, a range of features there. I encourage you to look at the release notes if you're interested in that. But one of the things I want to make folks aware of, and even users that have been in the system for a long time, not always aware of this, is we also have, and this is where you request support, obviously, this is where you request support, but also here is training support. And they've got really a great feature here where they have videos and then documentation on the bottom. And these first two videos are really, really good in terms of background on entering project information and modifying project information. And they're from different entities, but the platform's very similar and the process is basically the same. So even though they're different platforms, in one case, the new project one is for California resource conservation districts, the same concepts, general concepts apply. There's also other training in terms of, there's one on how to create an account, and basically to create an account, for those that don't have that, you can just go in and log in. And if you don't have a login, there's a request a login function there. And that then goes to Sitka. They give you a login and password, so you're all set up. And then we will assign your status in the system, and the status is everything from sort of a public user who has no access privileges into the system to what we call a project steward, which is the kind of the primary contact for an organization that's entering information. So if you feel that your access to the system is not what it should be, talk to me or Tiffany, send us an email, and we can change your status depending on what kind of access you need to the system. But I think most of you here do have access to the system. One of the other thing is they have a video on that Project Firma evaluation system. As I said, we're not quite ready to adopt that. It's not robust enough for our process, but good overview there. And then there is the optimization guide on the bottom. These are all PDF documents that are available. I don't think that's something that you would need, but if you're interested in how we can continue to customize the platform for various functions, you can look at that. The administrator guide is more really for project administrators like Tiffany and myself. But this next one, Connecting Project Firma with Geospatial Services and Desktop GIS, this is one that you may want to look at if you're trying to import GIS into the system for project boundaries and that sort of thing. And this is an area that I'm not really an expert in yet. I'm still learning this, but they have really good guidance on it. And actually I'm gonna have an opportunity here, I think, to enter some projects using GIS files. So that's the help support that's available. Any questions about that? It's a great resource. And if there's something in help that you would like to see in there that isn't there, let us know. I think we should be able to work with Sitka to attach our video to this. I'll check with them and see if we can do that. Or there might be another way that we can get the video on the project site. I'm just not sure at this point if we can do that. So that's the training. No questions about that. I just want to give folks a quick overview of the kind of the structure of the system, which I think is important to understand, because when you're entering projects within this dynamic interrelated database, and kind of understanding the components is really useful. We have about pages now, which provide information both about the Clackamas project partnership, but also specific things, as I said, like TAC meetings, meeting notes, that sort of thing, where we can attach documents in there. So we have a lot of capabilities within this. So if there's a category of a page that you think should be put into the about information, we can do that, and we can attach documents to it. So that's a feature that I think will expand over time. Projects, you can look at the full project map, full project list. You can look at just your organization's projects, and you can look at them in terms of proposals, pending projects, and project attachments. So there's a lot of functionality in that. And so I encourage you to kind of, look at that, play with it a little bit. Program info, this is where we put in the nuts and bolts that really describes the program. And this is obviously different for each Project Firma platform. The Puget Sound Partnership is going to have a different structure, but in many ways they're very similar in terms of, okay, what are the issues we're looking at, in this case, limiting factors. We have the focal species, which are the salmon and steelhead populations, bull trout and Pacific lamprey. They're all listed in there. So when you're listing focal species, when you set up a project, it links into this portion of the database. Project types, I think, is something that we should just quickly talk about. These are the project types that we have: monitoring, outreach, engagement, planning, restoration, and studies. I think most of you are here to enter restoration projects, but we can track other things like a planning project, developing a watershed action plan. That can go in the system, and I believe Rita entered that for their watershed action plan in there. So it's a way to track a variety of projects, not just restoration. What's nice is you can click on this and you can get a full list of the projects. Obviously, restoration has got the most projects. So that's just the way we've set up the project types. Any questions about that part? That's
Neil
project.
has a question.
Yeah, sorry, John.
Yeah.
Chat, but I haven't really found in looking at your screen, I couldn't find the raising hand button.
Oh, yeah.
Can you remind me where the boundary between planning and studies is, or have we determined that?
I don't think we've really defined that. I think, planning is where you're basically doing the background information and setting up priorities. I think a restoration action plan, obviously that has plan in its title. That would be appropriate. I think studies are things that are discrete studies that would take place where you're looking at water temperature information, something like that.
A restoration project design would be part of restoration, or the design phase would go into planning?
No, it'd be anything restoration project related, where it's an individual project, where you're going through initial evaluation and all of the steps that you normally go through with the project. That would be entered under restoration.
Thank you.
John, Rita Baker had a similar question dealing with features and when they're shared and when we are paying for customization.
What's the question? When are we paying for customization?
One moment. If Rita's back on, I thought she'd asked the question. She asked what the threshold between paying for new adaptations versus when we receive a shared feature from Sitka.
So shared features are those that we can pull into the system without really modifying the platform. A good example of that is when I showed you that map where they have the groupings of the projects. That's a new feature, one that was just shared with everyone because it fits within the sort of the format or the framework that we have. So no modification necessary. Something else, if we were trying to pull it in and it required modification, we just can't pull it directly in. We have to modify it either to customize it to our needs or just the way our platform's set up. Then that's kind of that threshold where potentially we would have to pay for that feature. Does that answer the question?
I saw a thumbs up from Rita. Thanks, John.
Okay. So there's project types. There's also the performance measures, and I'm going to drill into that a little bit more, where we've got all of the various performance measures that we've set up, large wood placement, off-channel wetland area increase, floodplain habitat protected, etc. These are all set in here. If you see a performance measure that you think that is missing, let us know, but these are the primary performance measures that are embedded in our strategic plan, in our reporting to OWEB and other organizations, etc. And a new one that we have added is Biennium Status, and I'll show you how to enter that in a bit. We added that because we want to be able to track projects that are proposed for each biennia or implemented in each biennia, because that's something that we will want to be able to query when we do reporting. So it's really important that folks enter in what biennia they're proposing these projects for. Obviously, this next round is for biennia 2. We ask folks to enter in the system what biennia they're working on, and in addition, what year they think the project will be implemented. Which can change. We're not going to hold you to that, but we need to understand that. And once we go through the prioritization and a proposed project, which is coded in the Biennium Status, is approved to move on, then it would become a Biennia 2 FIP funded project, implemented project, and we would code it that way. And I'll show you how that works in a little bit. So these are all of the performance measures. For each one, if you click on it, you get the details. And the nice thing is too, you get a nice graph showing which projects implemented by year and how much was implemented in terms of the miles, for example, of large wood placement. So there's a nice summary feature in here for the projects. You can look at all the projects that have that performance metric, et cetera. So it's all in there. Of course, these can be edited, and we can modify these or add performance measures as we see fit. One of the other basic background features is the watersheds. And this is another way we track it, is by 6-field watershed, and we've defined that for the entire area. And so when you locate your project, it will let you know which particular watershed you are in. But these have been defined for the entire partnership area in terms of 6-field watersheds. It's kind of the basic geography.
John, how do you handle confluence projects?
It's a judgment call in terms of which watershed you'd put it into, if it's right on the margin of two watersheds. For the most part, I think they fall squarely within a watershed, so you should be okay with that. The other is the organizations. These are all the organizations that are directly involved with the partnership or are potential partners. And Tiffany and I often get questions about organizations and funding sources where people are trying to enter one. They're in the project page, they're trying to enter an organization and that they don't find it. That's because it hasn't been put into the database, and you need to contact Tiffany or me to have a new organization entered into the system if they're not in there. And it's really straightforward. We just need to know what the organization is, hopefully a contact individual, but it's not absolutely necessary, but we can do that. So I encourage you to kind of look at this. If there's additional organizations you partner with that you'd like to have in here, let us know and we can add those organizations so we can create new organizations. Similarly, folks look at the funders, and they often will ask, well, this particular funder wasn't in the drop down when we entered our project information. Similarly, we can add funders to this, so no issue there. But I would encourage you to look, if you have an issue where you can't enter a funder, look through this list, because sometimes funders are entered under a different sort of name or the way it's set up. So sometimes the funder's in here that you want, but just under a slightly different name. But similarly, we can add funders. That's not an issue. So that's it for the program info. That provides kind of the in terms of the database, these are all interrelated and all of them are linked to projects. Manage is basically where we can modify basically the whole system in terms of ecological concerns, limiting factors. We can add focal species, project types. This is the adaptability that we have to customize the system, basically. So when we're adding, for example, more documents to the system, we want to set it up so that we can add documents. We can go into document libraries and add them to about pages, etc. This is primarily an administrative function for all of these in terms of changes that we can make. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, now I want to show you how to enter the biennia information, and this will also help with any sort of performance measures, and I'll go through how to enter the performance measures. The performance measures, when you're proposing these projects, is really important to list all your performance measures, because that's going to be a key factor that will be evaluated in the project prioritization process. We want to see where you're targeting the performance measures, what's going to be the ecological uplift in terms of the amount of large wood or riparian planting area. So that's really important when you enter the projects for the prioritization process. So let me show you something here. You could just set something up.
And John, there is a question about sorting project proposals, including by biennium.
Okay, what's the question?
Can members conduct a sort on projects based on biennium status? I think you may also show how all projects can be sorted in different realms of what's entered.
Yes, you can sort the project by biennia entered. You can sort projects by any of the performance measures. And I can show you that when we go through this example that I have. Let me share the screen here. Can everyone see that? Who's the shared application? I don't know what that is. So this is a project that Tiffany entered in here, and I just want to show you how you can add performance measures, and we'll start with what biennia the project is being implemented in. Just so
John, we're
yeah.
seeing an email.
Oh, you are? Okay, weird.
Thank you.
No, it should be up. Screen share. Okay, now can you see the expected accomplishments?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so as you go through the kind of the workflow as you enter the projects, and you can see there's the overview, the spatial information where you put in where the site is, and now we're at the expected accomplishments. And expected are really what you're proposing to do. Once you've implemented the project, you would update it in terms of what you actually did. So that's an important thing to understand. But in terms of entering the the accomplishments, you've got a drop-down menu here, and you can add in any of these performance measures that are applicable to your project. And so I'm going to enter Biennium Status, add that. I'm going to, and you can see that it's then set up below, and I'll go through that. And then let me put another one in there, large wood placement, and add that. And I can show you these two examples. So this new one is Biennium Status, and we were really looking for kind of a way that we can code the projects by biennia. It'd probably be more straightforward if we had that right up front in the project entry, but that means a modification in the system, and we got to work with Sitka to do that. And when you think about it, it makes sense for us to have the Biennium Status as a performance measure, because it is a performance measure in terms of, did you move from proposed project to implemented project based on our prioritization. So it is important that we track that. And this way we can query projects by Biennium Status.
John, can you?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you clarify when a project may be funded and design work done in one biennium, but implemented in another, which biennium would be considered relevant?
The relevant biennia would be the biennia that it is starting to receive FIP funding.
Thank you.
And so then it would be a real project. So it doesn't necessarily have to be when the project is implemented. And in fact, that's a really good question, because I think we could do that for this example. So has the project been implemented? Let's say no. Select the biennia for the project. It's, let's say, it'll be proposed biennia 2. And then the value is the year that you expect the project to be implemented. And that's where you would put in when the funding would start for that project. So if it's in Biennia 2, you anticipate the funding would start in 2022. That's what you would enter in there. And obviously this can change. We're not going to hold you to that. Ultimately, we would, once it's approved and we know where it is in the queue for funding, then we can adjust that.
I just like a level of detail that we don't need to care about. When you said when it would start to receive FIP funding, is that only OF funding, or would that include match?
I think it includes match. It would include anything where the idea here is when you are actually approved for the project and starting to implement it, whether it's FIP funding or match funding or whatever. That's fine. We understand that there's going to be a variety of funding sources, but the idea is to put in what biennia you think it's proposed for, and when you think that the project would move forward with starting out with the design, permitting, etc. You're starting to expend funds essentially on the project.
I raised my hand also. I was just going to get clarification that implementation does not mean construction. Implementation means beginning work on the project or advancing the work on the project at that time.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. You're advancing the project. It does not mean construction. Exactly. So ultimately, when we go to the next level, which let's say the project's been implemented, you say, yes, it's been implemented. The relevant biennia was implemented in Biennia 2, and then you can put in here when the project actually started. This is, this first one is proposed, so you're not really sure. Here you've got actual data on when you started to expend money on the project. So that's what you do once you're, at that stage.
Jim Brick has a question, John.
Yeah, Jim.
Have you thought about projects, say we have a large woody debris or side channel with a riparian component, and you implement, say, the side channel or large woody debris project in one biennium, and then you wait to do the riparian component. say in the next biennium in the following winter? How might that play out?
Yeah, we really don't have a way to track that currently in the system. That's something that we could do, but currently, look like down here where we've got large wood placement, we don't have the year that it's implemented. That would be a field that potentially we could add if we think that it would be implemented separately or a different season or different year from the other one. We could enter that in there, but currently we don't have that functionality to show the phasing on a project. However, that's something that you would put in the project description, that it's a phased project, because that's a really important consideration. So it would be captured in the project proposal, just not within the performance measures. So let me just quickly show you large wood placement, just as another example of a performance measure that's in the system and how it's entered. So we've got placement density, which is cubic yards of material per 1,000 feet. This is our basic metric that we're using. Most projects I'm finding are putting in more than 25 cubic yards per 1,000 feet. We might want to think about adjusting this performance measure later to capture the larger volumes, but nevertheless, this really gets to what we're looking at for ties to the metrics in the Lower Columbia Recovery Plan, et cetera. So you would enter the volume that you have per 1,000 feet, and in some cases that would be averaged over your project. But there's two locations that you'd be placing wood potentially. There's in-channel wood, and there's wood that you would place up on the floodplain that would be more habitat logs for, when the floodplain's inundated, but also providing, other functions. And then the value is the length of channel that you're estimating you're going to be placing wood. So let's say you've got a side channel that's 2,500 feet long, but you're placing wood over 2,000 feet. That's what you would enter in there. So any questions about that? That gives you a sense for kind of the structure of how we're setting up the performance measures. And it's very similar for, other measures in here. You have the basic system set up. Let me just give you one more example.
John?
Yes.
Okay, on the back of placement density, you put in 2,000, then there's a plus there, add expected value. What does that mean?
That would be for another one where you're doing floodplain, let's say in this case, and you think it's going to go over, the entire length. So that's what adding expected value would be.
Okay, so they're both the same project, just different aspects of it.
Yes, and another example would be, let's say you're going to be placing the maximum amount over 2,000 feet, and then maybe a smaller amount, for example, in the channel over the other 500 feet. You can do that.
Thank you.
That's what it means by adding expected values. Now, obviously, these are proposed values. Once you close out the project or you're at the reporting stage, it's already been implemented, everything's been done on the ground, then you would report actual measures in the system. But this is for the proposal stage right now. So let's look at one other value here. Native planting area, for example. Add. And so you'll see it down here. And this one is segregated out. What side? One side, two sides. Let's say this is two sides. And you would enter the acreage. So let's say 30 acres. And you could say maybe on one side, it might be a project where you've got adjoining sides for part of it, maybe one side for another, and this would be 10 acres, that sort of thing. So any questions then about performance measures? I don't want to go through all of these. I think they're pretty intuitive, and if you run into issues, let us know.
I have a question on this one, John.
Yes.
Could we add a value of stream length for riparian?
We have that.
Oh, perfect then. Thank
This
you.
planting area.
Yes.
We also have invasive species removal area, removal length, and native planting channel length. So you can do it by area, by length, or by both.
Perfect. So we would encourage use of both. Thank
Yes.
you.
And for tracking purposes and meeting our metrics that we're trying to accomplish, I would put preference on the mileage first and then the acreage second.
Mm. So I think where we can enter both, then that would probably be best. But you're right, the Lower Columbia plan tracks it by miles, I believe, yes. Any questions about performance measures? Nope. Okay, let me, so this is a project that Tiffany's been setting up. Let me just kind of quickly show you how you can move on here. So you're setting up the project, you've entered already, and I'm not going to go into details unless folks have questions. You've entered in the overview information. Well, let's just start from the beginning here. Go back. Yeah, it's not letting us do that for some reason. So anyway, it's pretty straightforward entering the overview information. The spatial information is the project location, and basically you can zoom into the map that's in the system, place your location there. If you need to, you can import GIS information on the project boundaries, and that is all detailed in the guidance that Sitka has. I have not done that yet. So I'm still kind of learning that process. So that's expected accomplishments right now in terms of the performance measures. Let's move on.
Real quick, John, maybe don't save that because this is a draft for another project. I don't know if that information's relevant for the particular one. Also, if you pull the down caret next to overview or spatial information, there should be another thing that pops down that you can click on to navigate to those categories. Just as a heads up, like if you click on spatial and you click watersheds, it should be able to take you to that page, like the watersheds section, if you want to be able to go through those visually with people.
Yeah, I don't really need to go through them right now. I think that's fine. So this is where you can list the focal species for the project. You can see what was listed here. You'd also can list project type. You can attach photos, and in there you can designate photos as key photos. And when you designate them as key photos, those are photos that will be used in the project fact sheet. So you can attach photos. Those that you assign as key photos would go to the project fact sheet. And then finally, you've got attachments and notes, and this is really important to understand, and a key part of what you'll probably want to do with your proposals is you can attach documents, you can attach Word documents, PDF, you can attach Excel files to this. If you have background information for the project, this is where you can enter it. If you have like a concept design, this is where you would enter it. If you have any other information that you think is relevant to the project, I recommend that you put it in here because it just adds additional detail, and that will be relevant, obviously, to the prioritization process. And so you can, again, enter documents in terms of Word documents, PDF. You can attach Excel files in the system. Any questions about that?
And
Okay,
John, you showed me how to include a link for a video.
Yes, you can put in links also. Did you do that for a project, Cheryl?
Sorry, it took me a moment. Yes, I did, for North Fork Eagle.
Good. Yeah, so you can enter all those sorts of things in here, and I encourage you to do that. And then finally,
John,
partners.
if I can ask
Go
one
ahead.
question before we move on. Where is the best place to add reference, to link to reference documents that identify projects as priority?
If it's a broader than just a specific project, I would say you would enter it in as a planning project or a study, and that's where you would attach the documents would be in that project.
I guess let me rephrase. If we've done a study, that study identifies that you should do X project, and I enter X project, what's the best way to reference back to, this is why we chose this project?
You could attach that, you could attach it here.
Okay. Thanks.
Well, I think with that, we can just kind of open it up for general questions. The workflow through the project entry is pretty straightforward across the board. I think where most people run into problems is where they're trying to list a partner or list a funding source that actually isn't in the system. And as I said, that's something that we can easily update and add new project partners, new funding sources. That's where a lot of the questions come from. Other questions? Are folks running into issues? Tiffany, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would add that one of the best things about folks adding the biennium information, even if it's like you're not able to precisely identify, it's implemented 1 year and which year it goes in, is it helps us when we're looking through the project proposals. And that's why we added that in there. So just as you're doing it, if you're getting caught up, like, is it one? Is it, if one's passed? But if it's 2 or 3, just do your best guess and it'll help us sort through these when it's time to assess the proposals. That's why it's in there. Another update I wanted to let folks know is I'm going to talk to Sitka today about potentially getting it on a different page, but for now it's going to be there. So it could be easy to accidentally overlook when you're doing performance measures. So make sure you just click it and add that in there. Try not to stress too much about the timing of it. It's just having it in helps us. One other thing I was going to add is when you're going through there, if there's a project you've already put in recently, that's biennium 2 or 3 proposal, please go back and just add that as a performance measure. I'm going to go in and for anything that's already been implemented in biennium 1, I will add that metric. But if you're, something recently that you've done that's proposed for 2 or 3, or pretty much anything that hasn't already been finished, please go back and add that to your draft or your proposal. It'll only take a minute and it'll help us with sorting. So yeah, just wanted to add that in.
Thanks, Tiffany. Hey, John, I'll get to you in a second here. I just want to underscore that for the projects that are being funded and implemented in Biennium 1, you don't need to do anything. Tiffany's going to go in and code those projects as implemented Biennium 1.
So John, we have John Borden and then Liz Gilliam.
Yeah, John.
Okay, thank you. I just want to be clear, Tiffany, on this. As I understand it, October 1 is the due date for everybody to have stuff in. After that, we will not be accepting statements.
I can address that.
Well, it's a 2-part question. Okay, the second part is, what I want to know is, when do we start looking and what do we look for? Do we just exclusively look for the biennium indicator, or will we be receiving some sort of list of, hey, here are the projects we want the team to evaluate?
So John is asking a question about the next step in this process, why you are proposing these projects, which is the prioritization and the evaluation of the projects. And John is part of the team that will be working on that. John, basically, I'm going to make it easy for you. I'm going to provide a list and a link to all those projects that are Biennia 2 proposed that we will be evaluating. And I will also provide summary details for those projects that will be useful for your evaluation. So just sit back and we'll spoon feed you basically with that.
And I apologize, I had to step away for a moment. For projects that were already in Biennium 1, you do need to do status updates, or Tiffany is going to do the update?
So to be clear, what Tiffany will be doing is putting in what biennia it's being implemented in the performance measures. In terms of other updates, that's up to you if you've got update information.
I think Neil was asking if it's anything past biennium, like what point do you go back and add it? But I think the short answer, Neil, is if it's something recent that you're proposing, Biennium 2, Biennium 3, if it hasn't happened and already passed in Biennium 1, please go back and add that as a performance metric, Biennium status. So
let me rephrase. We've been working on a study since this project started. I have not been in there updating it. When do I need to do that? You know, it's still underway.
So my question, Neil, this would be a project that you're not proposing for evaluation, but you just want to update the project so that when we report out, for example, to OWEB project status, you've done that. I wouldn't worry about that. I mean, update anytime, obviously, but towards the end of the biennia, we're going to be working with Cheryl to report on the status of all of the implemented projects, and we certainly want to have any updates in there by then.
Thank you for that mention, John, and for everyone to know, typically the OWEB board meeting where FIP implementers report out is in the next year. For this, in the odd year, for this go round, we're going to be reporting in December to OWEB about our activities as a Clackamas partnership, what we've achieved and what is ongoing through the biennium. So anytime you grab a chance to update your projects, we'll be sure then to know that they are mentionable in our report to OWEB. So thanks for the question, Neil. And then Liz had a question.
Thank you. It's been a few weeks since I've been in here, so I'm not certain this is still the case, but my memory is when I was making changes to an existing project, I had to go through the entire menu of information, and if there was any missing data, I needed to be able to provide that before I could save all of my changes that I had just made. Is that the case, or is there a way to save as you go and not have, you know, all the complete information at that one time?
So you're talking about updating a project. It will take you through the full workflow from the beginning to maybe where you want to modify things. Let's say you're modifying a performance measure. You can just click through each of those and you should be able to progress through them. But if they do ask for more information, you probably need to do that because they do have error checks in there if something hasn't been entered. But in most cases, you should be able to progress through that to the section where you're adding the information, for example, on performance measures, and then you would save and update that. Ultimately, once you've done all of that, it goes to the administrators for approval, and we make sure that things are functioning correctly and look at it that way. But I'm not sure why you were getting those issues, because if it's been entered before, there shouldn't be issues, because presumably when it was entered before, there was that quality control check.
Yeah, I don't know why that happened, but maybe there were new features added that hadn't been in there before. And so there were upcoming questions that I didn't have the answers to, that I couldn't progress through the entire where I couldn't save my changes because I couldn't, otherwise I would have had to have put dummy answers in order to be able to save everything I just did.
And yeah, that is true in the system. If it's a field that you're not quite sure how to fill in, I would recommend you put in a dummy number and come back
Okay.
to save your information. I think that's a better way to do it. So thank you. That is a subtlety in the system. And as we get upgrades, in some cases, you're right. If you revisit a project because of the upgrade, it may ask for additional information.
Yeah, it'd be nice if you could at least save the work you've done to date and be able to exit out and before finishing completely.
Yeah, I talked to Sitka about that, and there are ways we could do it, but right now they prefer to have it the way it's set up because it's a quality control check that all fields are entered and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It creates QA/QC issues if we allow folks just to progress without filling in those fields. So it's, I mean, it's probably not the best system, but that's the reality.
Okay. All right.
Daniel has a great question that I'm interpreting relates to our match. Daniel? Daniel,
Okay, I'm
you may be-
unmuted now.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was just curious, as everyone remembers, our FIP award was January 2019. And then, of course, we couldn't actually spend any of the FIP dollars last summer, 2019, because of the timing of how money was allocated by OWEB in their board meeting. This was a big question for us for a couple of years, I remember, but it occurred to me that probably several of the watershed councils, including our own, had restoration projects implemented in 2019 that were not funded by the FIP, but because of the limiting factors that they were addressing that match the limiting factors that are part of our FIP program, it might be worthwhile entering them in. As you know, as Cheryl, you know, the match is a great thing, and I was thinking about that too. Just wondering if that's something that would be helpful for all of us to be entering into Project Tracker.
So I'll say something, and then I'm sure Cheryl will have something to say about it. I think that is a really good point, and almost a policy question for the partnership to say that if you implemented a project that is a match, regardless of what year it is, if it's a matching project, you should enter it into Project Tracker, even if it doesn't have any FIP funding, if it's all match, or if it was funded before we got the official FIP dollars. It's going to be important to track those and list them.
Yeah, because I was thinking in particular, we had a project that was both fish passage and habitat enhancement last summer. But because it was done last summer, I think all the funding was actually lined up before the OWEB award, but the project was implemented after the OWEB award. And so I'm thinking that's probably eligible to be counted as match. And, you know, that was, I guess, about a $200,000 project. So it could definitely help for match purposes.
Yeah.
Very helpful for match. And I suspect if we fulfill all of the entries, that would be entered as Biennium 1 and all completed, no OWEB funding. Similarly, as we were going through our capacity building funding support with from OWEB and planning for implementation, we had also the understanding that projects being completed in during that time period, 2018, could also be recognized for match. And we'll clarify that as we go, but I know we were anticipating Metro's Richardson Creek project would be considered an acceptable match. Mm-hmm. And then we'll check in with other folks that are doing projects within our geographic area for potential inclusion as match, as long as they're not being matched to other federal funding sources. And Garth, for these purposes, I'm thinking of the habitat funded project in the upper Clackamas with Oregon Wildlife Foundation. That could be helpful.
So I'm thinking out loud because of the importance of tracking these match projects sort of separately. I think we'll want to add a performance measure that says that this project is not FIP funded, but is a match project. That way we can query those.
Oh,
Um,
great.
So I'll work with Tiffany to set that up and get out guidance for folks on that. I think that's a really, really important consideration. So thanks for bringing it up, Daniel.
Yes,
Okay,
thank
sure.
you.
You're welcome.
Daniel.
And I actually have kind of a follow-on to this same topic. I've mentioned this several times over the past few years, but some of our projects, Johnson Creek Watershed Council's projects, we've managed to secure some types of mitigation funding that don't actually cannot count as match because, you know, the supplemental environmental programs through DEQ. In fact, both of our projects this last summer had some SEP funding for like the initial engineering work. And so I'm just wondering about entering that into those funding sources into Project Tracker. I'm almost thinking we probably should just pretend they do not exist in terms of Project Tracker, because I don't think there's any way of entering something in and saying, oh, you can't use this for match. Is that right?
Not that yeah, I think you're right. I don't know of a way you can do that in the system. We could probably set it up so you could, but it gets convoluted and complicated.
Okay. Okay, well, maybe it might be worth like in a comment section somewhere where you can add project comments, because I think among other things, it might make a project seem like it was, wow, how did you do it for that little amount of money? Because it doesn't show up in the budget. And then along those lines, one of the projects we just completed this summer, a FIP project, the Lower Johnson Creek project, had a different type of funding too, a huge component of the funding. And that was actually the result of a lawsuit settlement between two parties. It was not anything like an SEP where somebody had been required to pay a fine. But what happened was there was a lawsuit, and the Northwest Environmental Defense Center at Lewis and Clark was involved, and because they're not allowed to accept money from lawsuits, they find an environmental restoration project that's somewhere near where the violation occurred, and they work to try to send the money that way, and that's how we got the project funding. But it was voluntary by both parties. They just they worked it out as a lawsuit settlement. So I'm just wondering on that particular one, do we enter that in Project Tracker?
I see no reason why you couldn't. It's not like a mitigation project where you can't take credit for the ecological uplift in that way. I think it's a legitimate one to enter. Obviously, you would need to think about how to characterize the funding source, but I think that's doable.
Right, because it's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, I think we all know one of the kind of ways of doing business in our industry in terms of these kinds of sources is that those companies that have to submit the mitigation money, or in this case, a lawsuit, they don't necessarily get recognized publicly as a funder of the project, right? I mean,
yeah,
we don't do that. So I'm just wondering in terms of entering this in, I mean, if we have like some listing of all these match fund projects at the end and which companies or agencies contributed match funding, I would imagine this particular company would show up in that list. So we don't have to answer the question now, but just something to think about in the future.
We know that our OWEB online proposals, the applications include an overview of what can be used as match and what isn't. So we're still entering those dollars in our OWEB proposals. So if there were a way in which we can label additional funds leveraged or something like that, where we know it's not a match and we know that we're not requesting the funds from OWEB.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something different conversation, but like PGE funds are sort of in the Netherlands there too. I mean, we've determined that they will count as match,
Yes.
but it's also kind of falls into that gray area, I think, too, in terms of acknowledging them as funder, right? I mean, since it is something they're required to do, right? They have to spend a certain amount of money every year.
The reason we get the OWEB recognition of match for the Habitat Fund is it's non-specific. Those funds are not for a specific project in order to mitigate. So with that flexibility in mind, the funds from PG are acknowledged.
Okay.
And John, in the guidance that you're going to send out about all this stuff that is match but not using TIP funds, can you provide whatever guidance you want us to follow about projects that are, you know, like we're doing lots of things around Kellogg Dam design, obviously, and riparian stuff that is not channel complexity within the FIP, although maybe some of it is, depending on where that boundary is. Can you provide a little bit of guidance for what types of projects we should be entering?
Oh yeah, that's true. I mean, you can't enter a project that doesn't fit within our FIP strategic framework. So that makes sense. You know, if it's a restoration project that is obviously adding complexity, that would be one. But if, for example, you're doing fish passage in Kellogg Creek, we did not list that as a priority under the FIP, so that could not be a match. So yeah, I'll provide guidance on that.
Alrighty, and then there was, while we were on the topic of match, we also have the opportunity to indicate in-kind match in the proposals. And then Rita Baker had a question.
Okay. I'm just curious if anybody had heard if at the December meeting we'll know more about the 100,000 that OWEB held back from our first biennium funding. Any tea leaves? Crystal ball?
We're expecting that to be made available in a future biennium, specifically biennium 2. All agencies have submitted their budget requests to the governor, and OWEB's still closely watching what funding rebound may occur. So I don't know that we'll know as early as December. And it may not be, there's a possibility that we won't know with certainty until the July approval of the biennium's funding. I would expect it somewhere in between, however.
I have a little follow-up related to the partnerships match. That if we are tracking it, it's still never been clear to me if there is an excess of match, how that can be allocated to other councils or other projects. Will this new system help that?
Well, let Cheryl answer that one.
As we all know, OWEB requires a 25% match for any funding that they provide. And that 25% match requirement is for our total FIP grant. And each project has a requirement of a nominal $1 at minimum. And so as we accumulate and recognize match dollars applied for all of our projects to the full Clackamas partnership, then we can recognize that. And that is to Rita's question. Now, what amount we have in, wait, I'm gonna interject one other component of that question. So how can match be applied to projects? Projects still need to have the funding required to complete. So that may indicate that additional funding beyond FIP, OWEB FIP dollars need to be sought after to complete one's project. We all have those requirements. Then to conclude the question, how much excess match can be applied, it's, we'll have to go back. I can go back and see what our match is at present and let y'all know.
Well,
So
and I
as
think,
Daniel mentioned, entering a previous project implemented in 2019, that's going to add to our overall match to date.
that'll be helpful, and I think, you know, having it in project tracker so we understand, you know, what's available and what isn't. And it's going to be a challenge in the coming years between the impacts to the economy and to foundations, you know, going forward, for us to find additional sources beyond FIP. It's going to be, and I'm guessing that a lot of the OWEB focus might go to areas that have experienced the greatest impact through the wildfires. So yeah, it's going to be a bit challenging for the coming years, more so than usual.
So Rita, I want to make sure that we've totally understood the question, because, you know, as Cheryl mentioned, you don't have to come up necessarily with 25 for each project because of the overall, but were you also thinking that if we have enough match, that you might want to be able to use some of your project match for something else outside of FIP, or were you just thinking about this overall match?
I'm not quite sure I understand your question. You know, getting back to the normal 25% we would have to provide for each project.
Well, no, see, that's the thing. You don't have to provide it for each individual project. Just
I understand. So that there's this pool of excess match that the partnership has, that I was trying to understand if it will be allocated first come, first serve. Because I think that we're going to be depending upon the partnership for match beyond what we can get from other sources.
Well, if I understand the question, Rita, I don't think any particular council or project proponent is going to be told, hey, you haven't come up with your 25%, you know, you have to, because, like, for instance, I know that our council is going to have more than 25%, so that's going to be contributing to the overall pool. So I think while we all need to find as much match as possible, I don't think we're going to have any kind of quota system for each individual project proponent.
Yeah, the way I look at it, maybe this is too simplified, is we've got a big bucket that we fill up with how much FIP money came in for that biennium, and we've got that bucket, and then we've got another pool of match money that comes in, and that's aggregated across, you know, all the projects, and we would look at is that a 25% match of that aggregate pool? So it doesn't come down to the, you know, each individual project. We look at it in terms of the aggregate.
Okay, that makes
That is
sense.
a better way to look at it, correct.
That makes sense. Okay. Thanks.
Any questions? Tiffany, anything you want to add?
No, I don't have anything off the top of my head that needs to be added right now. I think one just thing to mention as you go through the projects, if there's pieces that you're like, oh, I don't know how to input this, I always put in zeros. That's just kind of a small thing that someone mentioned earlier, like, what do I put in for the number? Just put in zeros. It'll get you through the project. It's kind of related to someone's earlier question.
Yeah, really good point.
Well, as mentioned, we do have this recorded, and it will be made available for all to see. Thank you so much, John, Tiffany, for answering questions prior to this meeting and then coming to this session prepared to answer a variety of questions that we didn't know what might be asked. Very helpful for you to be providing an overview to get us started, answer the questions as they came up, and perhaps, since we do have about 10 minutes, are there any issues that you, Tiffany, or John have been answering for our partners that are questions that haven't been asked today?
No, I really can't think of anything. I think we covered kind of the key questions that have come up as folks are entering information. I think the budget discussion was really good because obviously we do parse out match in these in your proposals. So that's a really important consideration. And as I said, we are going to provide a way to code projects that are match projects. They're not involved with FIP funding. So that was really good.
Thanks for those comments too. Well, thank you all. If there's nothing else, we would be adjourned.
Thank you for hosting this meeting, Cheryl. And for folks who, maybe later in line are running into issues, feel free to email me. I'm happy to do a Zoom screen share and get you through this process if you're having struggles. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Right,
everyone.
thanks.
Thanks
Bye.
Have fun with Project Tracker.
Bye now.